This section, chapter 19, we're going to look at the second half, which is actually like second two-thirds of that chapter. But it, like the rest of the chapter, is not such a simple thing. And it raises a couple of questions that I think we often look at Lot, look at his family, and it's so easy to criticize him. And there's no question that he made some bad decisions, but it made me think of a few things, and that is, when God speaks to us, do we listen to him? Seems like Lot didn't, and it's easy to say that, but if we turn it around, I think that's a hard question. The other thing is, when God warns us in his word, do we pay attention to him? It's easy to see that Lot kind of pushed aside the warnings and didn't think they were serious, but I think the same thing happens to us. And the final question that popped in my mind about this is, when God looks at our life choices, is he pleased with them? It's easy to look at a guy like Lot and list the things that he did wrong, but if we turn that around to look at us, what does God think about our choices in life? So let's spend a few minutes looking at this, the rest of this chapter, from 15 to the end of chapter 19. And let's ask God for his wisdom. Father, we thank you so much. We know the Spirit of God is the author of your word. We know that it teaches us about you. I pray this morning the Spirit gives us wisdom so that we may understand your word. I pray that you would guide us through this chapter. Help us to see things that you want us to know. I pray too, Father, once again, that we don't just accumulate knowledge and learn things, but instead that we would respond in obedience to your word. And I ask this in the name of our Messiah. Amen. Verse 15 resumes with the story of Lot and his family. We know that the two angels came in to see Lot. When they came in, they were going to eat. Next thing we know, the house is surrounded by people demanding that the men, the angels that came to visit Lot, be brought out so that the people may know them. They might have sexual relations with them. Lot refuses. The angel rescue Lot, pull him back in the house. They tell him this place is going to be destroyed. If you have any family that's not here with you now, go and warn them. And Lot leaves the house at night. He goes to find his sons-in-law, the two men that were spoken of, and he warns them about what's to happen. And it says they reacted like somebody who was joking. They figured that Lot was just fooling around with them. Lot goes back to his house. In verse 15, the story continues. It says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. Lot was warned the night before about the destruction of Sodom. He went out to find his sons-in-law, and yet in the morning we still find Lot in his house. Now, I don't really know how much time, and I don't think it's possible to know, but we do know they ate dinner, which it was probably dark by then, so who knows, 6, 7 o'clock at night. They eat dinner. The men come and surround the house. The angels warn Lot. He goes out to find his sons-in-law who tell him, in essence, you're crazy. He goes back to the house, and it's daybreak. It's dawn the next day. Lot's still in his house. So he had to be there for several hours after being warned. I don't know exactly how long it took, but it did seem to say that Lot really wasn't in that much of a hurry. And this warning, the angels say, hey, let's go. And it reminded me, when your kids are teenagers and you're trying to get them up to go to school. That's exactly what it reminded me of. You come on, the clock, you got 5 minutes and 3 minutes and 2. There I say to them, hey, what's the matter with you? This place is going to be destroyed. Could you imagine your neighbor's house is on fire? It's the middle of the night yet. Hey, your house is on fire. Yeah, we'll be right out, man. We're getting ready, kids are here, and, I was, like years ago, it reminded me of a friend of mine. I hung around with a bunch of guys that in retrospect, I realized they were crazy. But I'll give you, the way that you know a person's really crazy is if you meet somebody and they come up to you and they, I'm really crazy. I'm a crazy guy. Those people are never really crazy. The people that are really crazy, they're crazy, but they think they're normal. That's how you know. And I know because I hear from my wife all the time. I'll tell her something and she'll say, yeah, you're normal. No, I am. They're really not. So this guy, my friend Dave Brophy, we called him Bro. He was a crazy guy. He was fearless. I mean, of all the people I've met in my life, Bro was fearless. He's no longer with us due to a couple of difficult circumstances, but he was a loyal friend and, like I say, most fearless guy I ever met in my life. One night, we were both about 19, and it was the middle of the night, and we're coming home from some party somewhere. I don't remember the details for some reason. And as we're walking back to the car, which we were trying to find, we walked past this house, and the house is on fire, the upstairs of the house. And I turned to Brof to tell him, hey, man, that house is on fire. But by the time I turned to him, Brof had already run up onto the front porch, took a chair that was on there, smashed the picture window, and he had run into the house to go tell everybody. He was fearless, but he knew that it was a really serious situation. And, those are the kind of guys make a decision like that save people's lives. I was still thinking about it. He's already in the house. It was crazy. But it reminded me of this type of thing. It's that kind of emergency that the angels are telling Lot, you must get out of here. It will cost you your life. And in the morning, he's there. He's still there. They urge him. They start to pressure him and to get him to go. And then in verse 16, it says this, but he hesitated. This seems insane, doesn't it? This is going to be destroyed. This place, entire town is going to be gone. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand, the hand of his wife, the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was on him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. Now, who would do such a thing? I mean, really. There's a theological term for this kind of behavior. It's called nut job. I mean, if somebody told you that this guy's out of his mind, they have to grab him. But, it's easy to criticize him. But then I started to think, being painfully honest, how many times do we hesitate when we have a clear word from God? How many times do we hesitate? We read something in the scriptures, we hear something in the sermon, we feel the leading of God to do something, and we're thinking, that's going to disturb my life, and I really don't feel like having my life disturbed. Man, I got to make a big change. Hesitation is a minor thing. I mean, sometimes it results in just flat-out disobedience. I worked hard to get this way. My life's really comfortable, and somebody comes along, and now I don't want to do that. And that's how Lot was. He was living in Sodom. He became very comfortable. He had the gradual slide, as we saw last week. He goes from being with Abraham, and eventually he comes into this sinful city. He's on the outside. He moves to the inside. He becomes part of the whole society. And the angels say, this place is going to be gone. And Lot goes, I got a life here. Things are going on. I don't really want to go. And the angels had to grab him and take him out. And I think that idea is missed. I have a series of pictures. The first one I call the incorrect Lot. This is a picture of them leaving the city, Lot and his family. See, here's Lot holding the hands of his daughters, and the angels are, behind him, and Lot's just going out obediently. That's how a lot of people picture this thing, Lot leaving. I have the dramatic Lot, which is often promoted to as another view. This dramatic Lot carrying packages, and Lot's in the back. He's determined to go. There's his wife in the back. How dramatic that, oh, you can't, all this drama going on. That's how people sometimes think about it. There's the closer to reality Lot in this picture. I think that's the correct Lot instead of the closer Lot. But we could stay with this, doesn't matter. This is a close, you see the angels have Lot's hands, his wife's hand, they're holding, and his daughters, see the angels are holding them, pulling them away as the city's being destroyed because they seized their hand, pulled them away, and there's his wife in the background. So this is a closer picture that the angels literally dragged him and his wife outside the city. And why? Why does this happen? It says they seized their hands, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. That's an incredible statement to me. Lot's hesitating. He doesn't, in the midst of all of this, God's compassion is still on him. And I think this is one of the things that we miss about the character of God. He is beyond explanation. We so often miss the greatness of God. He's nothing like, that's why it says our God is above all the other gods. Our God stands alone. Our God is unique. Even though this guy is really disobeying God, his compassion, God's compassion was on him. He forced him to be saved whether he wanted it to be or not. That's an incredible God. And to me, that's a great comfort, the picture of God. So often the devil will make us feel when we fail, and I'm not excusing failure, but we're human beings. It's bound to happen. God doesn't desert us. The compassion of God is still on us. And you look at this. Here's a guy who's living in this place and he doesn't want to obey, yet God forces him to be out for his own good. That's an incredible picture of God. There's no one like God. Lot hesitates. The angels grab him. Come on, you're going anyway. They put him outside the city. And once again, the angels tell him in verse 17, when they had brought them outside the city, one of the angels said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be swept away. Escape. Go. Get going. What is the matter with you? And then the angel says, and don't look behind you. Now, to me, at first, that's kind of like saying, don't think about an elephant for the next 5 minutes. Doesn't it seem like that? Get out of here, get out of here. Don't look behind you. Oh, man. I want to look. The idea is not just taking a quick peek or looking at a curiosity. The idea is a deep longing or desire for. He said to him, listen, you need to escape. Go ahead. Do not look behind. Do not desire what you're leaving behind. Don't desire it. Get out. And again, it's kind of easy to criticize them, but I think it's a picture to me, the whole idea of sin. It's kind of like that. That sometimes we have a tendency to look back in our life at things that we used to do, at things that are a part of us, and we have a desire for them. But it's not good for us. We need to keep our eyes focused on where we're going and never to desire the things that are left behind if God changes our circumstance. I know humanly that's an impossible thing, but with God, with the Spirit of God, it is possible. He said, look, you go, you escape, God has something for you. Do not desire what you're leaving behind. But Lot said to them, in the midst of all this, oh, no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it's small. Let me escape there. Isn't this a small place? That way my life can be saved. And he said to him, the angel, behold, I'll grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the town was called Zoar. And the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. First, Lot hesitates when God gives him commands, and then he begins to bargain. And it's really silly, but have you ever done anything like that? We're much too sophisticated in 2017 to do something like that. Well, God, I don't really want to do what you want, but hey, how about this? That's pretty good, isn't it? Not exactly what you wanted, but it's better than nothing. That's what Lot's doing here. Get out, you got to get out. Look, I can't go, I'm going to die. It's too far. You kidding me? I can't make it all the way to that mountain. And he says, let me go into this little town. It's insignificant. What difference does it make if I stay in this little place? Come on. And the angel says, okay, I'll let you do that. And he negotiates like Abraham in the previous chapter, except when Abraham negotiates, it's for the welfare of other people. When Lot negotiates, it's for his own benefit. There's totally different views of looking at something. And he calls the town Zoar, which is small. And that's what it became known as, that town, Zoar, small. Hey, look, it's insignificant. It's not a big deal. Let me just stay over here. And the angel lets him go. We see, can we see the picture of Sodom? The Sodom setting? This gives you a little map of the whole area. You can see down at the bottom of the lake, the south of the Dead Sea there, it's Gomorrah, Zoar, Zeboim, Admah. These are the towns that were in the battle. Remember when Abraham came and rescued Lot? The 4 kings in the battle against the 5? Lot was living in Sodom. You think you get a little warning from that. Abraham rescues him, takes him out of there. Lot goes right back. That was his life. That's what he valued. He went right back there. So he goes back there. We could see how far. It wasn't really far from where it was. And I'm going to talk about that location. Now, I might as well say it now. The Lord, it says, the Lord rained down, verse 24 and 25. Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all in the valley, all the inhabitants of the cities, and all that grew on the ground. We have evidence of major destruction in that area. It's filled with sulfur deposits, with asphalt. Things are burnt out all around that area. There's many people who believe that God filled in that whole area. If we could see that map again, the whole area south of the Dead Sea, that the Dead Sea extended even further south, but it was filled in when the fire and brimstone came. The towns were destroyed and filled in. One of the reasons people believe that is that the Dead Sea has 2 different levels. The majority of the Dead Sea, which you see in there, is anywhere from 1,000 to 1,400 feet deep. That southern part, like from where Sodom is and down, is only 14 to 16 feet deep. So people think that this happened, that this area was filled in during the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Some people believe the Dead Sea became the Dead Sea also from this event, that all the minerals and everything that fell into the water made it from fresh water into this type of environment. I don't really know. But I think the main thing that we could take out of this is that this place was destroyed by God. People have tried to explain the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in many different ways. Some people think that it was a volcano. It would have to be one heck of a volcano, cover an area like that. Some people think it was an earthquake. Some people think it was a buildup of methane gas that caught on fire. There's a professor from NAU firmly convinced it was a comet. But the scripture tells us what happened, that it was God who brought this judgment upon these people because of sin. There's a judgment for sin. And I think that's the main point of this, that when it came to a certain point, God had waited through his patience and kindness and saw that, humanly speaking, we're at the end of everything. Nothing's going to get better anymore. And when that happened, God brought his judgment. Lot's wife, verse 26, but his wife from behind looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Again, this is an idea not so much of taking a quick look over your shoulder, But remember, Lot's wife was most likely born in Sodom. She grew up there her entire life. That was her life. And her looking back, in a sense, was really rejection of what God wanted. Rejection of God, and she wanted the world that she lived in. It was more important to her. And she couldn't leave it behind no matter what. Some people say that she was encased in salt. That's one of the weird things about that whole area, is that things that are left outside become covered with minerals. And I don't really know. I mean, sometimes we get so caught up on the details of this and that and why. She's turned into salt. Was it a pillar of salt? Is it? I don't know. I mean, that misses the point to me to talk about that kind of stuff. You could believe anything you want on that. But the real thing is that she turned back. She longed for her life without God. That's what she longed for. 27 and 28, it says, Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, looked back toward Sodom and Gomorrah, looked toward all the land in the valley he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. In the chapter before, remember, the three men had come, one being the Lord, two being the other angels that lead out Lot and his family. And they met with Abram at his tent, and they began to talk about what was going to happen. And here Moses goes back. The next day, Abram went outside of his tent, came to the place where he had met with God and discussed what was going to happen in Sodom and Gomorrah. And when he went to that place, he could see the city in the distance, but he didn't. Fire. In 29, it said, Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Moses writes that God remembered Abraham, and it's not the idea that God forgot and then suddenly it came to his mind. It's more the idea of acting on something. God remembered Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, God makes the covenant with Abraham that he would watch over him, that he would keep him safe, that he would make him a unique people, a great people. His name will be known around the earth. That promise also came to Lot, because Lot was in that family. And it says God remembered Abraham. God remembered the promise he made to Abraham, the covenant he made with Abraham, and because of that, he brought Lot out to safety. So he overthrew everything around, but Lot and his family was taken out. Now we have the end of the chapter, which is a strange story in the midst of a strange story, in the midst of another strange story. Lot went up from Zoar and stayed in the mountains, and his two daughters with him. But he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he stayed in a cave, he and his two daughters. Then the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old. There's not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in to lay with her father. And he did not know when she laid down or when she arose. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him. That way we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab, and he is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Just when you thought this whole story couldn't get any crazier, we come to this. Lot, after staying in Zoar for, I don't know, a very short period of time, becomes afraid being in the city. I don't blame him. I would be afraid too. You're living in the valley which used to have 5 cities that were large and populated, and all of a sudden they're burned. The entire place is burned. It says even the vegetation on the ground. And after a couple of days, Lot thinks, this is a little too close to the action. You know, those guys told me to go to the mountains. I think that's where I'm going to go. So that's what he does. He packs up with his two daughters, and he goes to the mountains where the angels instructed him. And then we have the bizarre behavior of the daughters. Definitely the idea of the older one, but she comes up with this plan that we should sleep with our father because we need to keep our family line going. And the younger daughter thinks it's a good idea too. She goes along with it. And she said, listen, you know, there's nobody on earth that can come into us in the manner of the earth. She says, there's nobody that can sleep with us. There's nobody's going to help us have children. Our family line's going to die out, so I think we should sleep with our father. Now, obviously, they knew there were other people on earth. Because where did they come from? They came from Zoar. They had spent time. There were people living there. She knew that they were not the only people on earth. So the whole idea that maybe she really thought that doesn't really hold water. Because they knew that it was true. I think it was more the idea of nobody would take them as wives because they were like bad luck. That's what they think. You know, this place was destroyed, that place was destroyed. Everybody's thinking, you know, those daughters are a lot. You marry one of them, that's bad luck. It's like 100 times worse than a black cat walking across your path. You want to mess around with the daughters a lot. There's nothing good going on there. So this is their plan. And you think, like, how in the world could you come up with something like that? I think it's a good idea. Like, it was the culture of Sodom that had so permeated them that they came up with an idea like that. I think we see that earlier. Lot moved in there, but we see the culture so affected him that he became a part of what surrounded. His daughters were born there. They never had exposure to anything else. That was their whole life. This whole sexually twisted culture made them think that this was an acceptable idea. It seeped into them so much that they thought this was a good thing. And then the girls have a son each, and they give them these names. Moab. Moab literally means from father. Is that bizarre? I mean, that's weird. You know, in the scriptures, Av is the name for father. We sang a song this morning about Abba. Abba literally means daddy. It's like the familiar term, but in the scriptures, Av is father. Mo, Av. Usually the meh sound is from father. That is a strange thing. Her sister names her son Ben Ami. Ben means son. Ami is my people. And his name literally means son of my people or son of my relative. I mean, that's so weird. I mean, the whole thing, it just shows they're almost like memorializing the event through the names of their children as though it's nothing to be ashamed of. Sad. It's just very sad. Both of these children, as they grew up, became the enemies of Israel, the descendants of Abraham. Both of them. When you read through the Old Testament, you see how they blocked at their path, how they wouldn't give them water. And God is angry with them and punishes them because they said, this is the way you treat your relative, the children of Abraham. If you look on the map, if we could see the map again, it shows where those two peoples stayed. See, Ammon up north, Moab still stayed down south. They controlled those two regions, and there was always bad blood between them. It's pretty similar to what happened with Hagar and Ishmael, that because people went outside of God's plan for proper behavior, especially in sexual relations, you see what happens. We're still bearing that today. The animosity between the Arabs and the Jewish people. We see this goes all throughout. All these weird plans that people had just resulted in more suffering and more problems. And the other thing is that after this whole event with Lot, we don't really hear about Lot anymore. He's mentioned by Peter in the New Testament. That's a whole different story. But we don't hear about him anymore. So there's two things that I was thinking about from this. One is the idea of separation. We need to be careful about how much we love the world around us. In the old days, when I first came to faith, that's the old days for me, like 35 years ago, that was a big deal. People talked about, how are you separated from the world? On the Got Questions webpage, I just like this because it's kind of a clear and maybe convicting explanation, but this is what they said. Personal separation, biblical separation, involves an individual's commitment to a godly standard of behavior. Daniel practiced separatism when he resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He was a biblical separatist because his standard was based on God's revelation in the Mosaic Law. A modern example of personal separation could be the decision to decline invitations to parties where alcohol is served. Such a decision might be made in order to circumvent temptation or to avoid every kind of evil or to live consistent with personal conviction. Last week, I was at a conference with a lot of Jewish believers, and someone started a Bible study, and I want you to hear me out through this whole thing. If you want to be horrified, that's okay. But they started a Bible study called Torah on Tap. Torah is the first 5 books in the scriptures. We call them Pentateuch, but Torah's first 5 books. Torah on Tap. They meet in a bar. Not the first time I heard of this. I mean, I know a lot of people have Bible studies in a bar now. Maybe it's just the kind of people I know, but I just was thinking, because I think back when I first came to faith, and for some of you, if your grandparents were believers, could you imagine you tell them you're going to a Bible study in a bar? Like, you know, when I first came to faith, like, the people would have dropped dead, you know? I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying this. I knew people when I first came to faith who would not swim on Sunday. Didn't allow their kids to swim. On Sunday, you did not swim because it was a Sabbath. I personally think the Saturday Sabbath, but that's a different story. At Moody Bible, when I went there, we signed a covenant when we came as students. You could not drink, you could not smoke, you could not go to movies, and you didn't go to dances. That was a whole 3 years. And every time when we took a break for summer, Dr. Sweeting would get up and he'd say, look, I know you think you're going on vacation, but you're not on vacation from our covenant. And you weren't allowed to go to the movies during the summer. I mean, we all knew about it because some people, we had people from all different backgrounds, some people were offended by some of these things. So rather than offend somebody, we were to concentrate on our education. Some churches today have a covenant that leadership still signs. I was with a pastor a couple of weeks ago, and he said, we have a covenant. People make these certain promises if they want to serve in leadership. And that used to be common years ago, but not so much anymore. When I came to faith, there were people who were opposed if you went to the movies. I mean, that was like a big deal. And dare I even say it, some people got upset if you went to the theater. Now, I want to say this clearly because I know that's the only thing that people are going to think. I'm not in that camp. I don't have a problem with theater, but I can tell you that sometimes with Mickey, I've been with Mickey, we're talking about different things. Mickey thinks real seriously about what kind of things are going to be put on. It's important to him. It's an important decision. I'm not saying that any of these things are right or wrong, but I just think that as believers, we need to think about some of these things. I think we should be aware of it. I personally believe that these things are individual convictions that come from God. That's what I believe. I don't think you can make rules across the board of all this stuff. But my point is that I don't think that we really think about it anymore. And sometimes I think we need to. That there are some things that maybe we just become too comfortable with. So we need to think about those things. The second idea that I get out of this passage is the idea of God's judgment. So many times you hear people talk about, I don't like the God in the Old Testament. It was really mean. He's judging this, smiting that, destroying this. But I like Jesus. In the New Testament, God's really nice. Well, the truth is that it's the same God. That God is kind and patient and loving and slow to judge, but there's a limit to God's patience. And then, if God is really fair and just, he has to judge wrongdoing. But God allows things to go on so far, and then he would bring in his judgment. We see examples in Scripture. The flood of Noah. We see this example of Sodom and Gomorrah. We see the example of Egypt, that it went on so long and finally God brought judgment. It's not that God used to be mean and now he's nice. It's that God is patient and long-suffering and doesn't desire anyone to perish. So he holds off his judgment. But when the time comes, we see when Israel entered into the land of Israel, when God brought the nation in there, it says that the iniquity of the Canaanites was filled. God went to a certain point, then he had to judge what was going on. Listen to what Jesus says in Luke in 17. He says, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will be like in the days of the sons of man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating and they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. Those are really sobering and frightening words. And we could look at Lot and think, what's with this guy? Like, he saw the signs all around him, but he chose to ignore them. But Jesus called us to remember, there is a time of judgment. It happened in the flood. There was another time of judgment during the days of Lot. And in the future, there will be another time of judgment as well. And the reason the judgment hasn't come is because God is merciful and loving and kind. So for us, we need to be warned that there will come a day when God is going to judge all the things that happen. It's in his own time, in his own way. But on the other hand, it really should be something that would encourage us to share our faith with people who are not believers. It's so important. We have the rescue plan. We know the way to the ark. We know the way out of Sodom. And his name is Jesus. We need to let people know about that. It's really, really important. And I think that goes back to the other thing that, again, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I am not making a judgment on anybody, because if I did, I'd have to start with myself. But it's individual. How do we live our life? I think that's very important. You can live a life that's separated and godly without being judgmental and, I don't know any other word to say it, but stupid. Really and truly. But there should be something different in our life that marks us as people that don't walk to the same drummer as the world. We need to take these stories, these examples of God's judgment as warnings. No person or nation continues on forever in rebellion against God. We can be sure, just as God judged in the past, that one day he will judge again in the future. So let's, while we have time, let's live our life in a way that honors him, in our life in a way that is a good reflection of our Father in heaven. And let's remember to share the gospel with people, because someday God will judge just as he did in the past.